Thank you, Hamden. How many in here have seen the movie Animal House? Yeah, we all have. Anybody remember the date that was scrolled across the bottom of the screen as the two guys are walking toward the fraternity house for Rush at the start of the movie? It was September 1962. And that's when I met Jim Morrison. I'm not sure how it all came together, but there were 6 of us that ended up renting this 3-bedroom, bath-and-a-half house with a carport in Tallahassee. And I think in the book No One Here Gets Out Alive, it mentions it was a tract home about a mile from campus, and he lived with 5 male housemates, 2 of whom he'd known before, which were the Calavocas brothers, and the other 3 were housemates at convenience. My first and only generic reference, of which I'm aware. He lasted 1 semester. It was really a trip. He was using the F word long before it was fashionable. He was full of drama. He loved to play mind games. And the 6 that were there, the Calavocas brothers, the elder brother, Nick, was in my class in high school. The younger brother, Chris, was in Morrison's class in high school. We had a fellow that graduated Gulf High, although he grew up in Dunedin, Brian Gates. And the other one was a fellow from Fort Myers named Ted Bowman. And Ted and Brian had been roommates the year before in the dormitory, and that's how all that came together. And Morrison started off, I mean, we all kind of got along. It was kind of fun. We partied. We sometimes went to class. Spent a lot of time at the sweet shop. If our house had had a second story, it would in fact have been an animal house. We had parties every weekend. Fortunately, we lived next door to a deputy sheriff, so when the neighbors got upset, they'd call him instead of the cops, thankfully. And Smitty was a cool guy. But Morrison, he would sit in a chair listening to a radio for hours at a time, making notes in a little book. No music. He was a mimic. During football games, he'd come out on the upper deck at Bill Campbell Stadium and start doing Brother Dave Garner. And the older folks of us remember that. He was kind of a Panhandle, Florida Red Fox type of comedian. But in the house, if we ever brought a girl to the house, it was tough, because he was not nice. And the other 5 at one time or another had him on the floor, ready to pound his head right through the floor. At night, he would, as I said, he used the F word long before it was fashionable. And he'd dress up sometime and he'd have a tie on with a knot like this. He called it a surfer knot. And he'd say these remarkable things to these cute girls who were standing next to an upright Amanda Freezer who played right tackle. And he almost needed a cane to jerk him away before he got killed. And of course we debated, should we really be doing that? Would that solve our problem? The best story about Morrison, the 62-63 winter was one of the most severe in Florida. We probably lost half our citrus during that winter. And the house we lived in was kind of on the top of a ridge, and it had a floor furnace. And when the floor furnace was going, if you kind of stood around it, you could feel some heat. But the wind would come in underneath the house and blow it out. So it was pretty chilly. Actually, it was darn cold. And I had a little heating heating pad like this, which was all I had because I was poor. And I'd sleep, in blue jeans and a sweatshirt, move this thing around. Morrison was living at that time. By the way, he was the son of an admiral, but he was generally on the outs with his dad. I think he was living with his grandparents in Clearwater. They sent him an electric blanket. That light blue, traditional electric blanket. So this particular night when he got it, he strips down and he kind of wraps himself in this blanket, electric blanket, and he just tells all of us all these obscene things that we can do if we want to get warm in his electric blanket. So Brian and I decided, when he goes to sleep, we're going to throw the switch, turn off the power to his room. well, he's not going to sleep, and he's not going to sleep, and he's not going to sleep. And so finally we just said, the heck with it. And then his roommate, the guy that lived in that room with him, was Chris Calavocas. He said, Chris, the light went out. Chris says, shut up, Morrison, I'm just the thermostat. Oh, okay. Next morning we go in there and we kind of kick him awake. He is as blue as his blanket. How was it, Morrison? It's good. You're mine. Anybody see the movie The Doors? All right, it opens with Morrison and his family in a station wagon riding through an Indian village in the tom-toms. And it resurfaces during the movie 3 or 4 times. This thing that had this monumental effect on Jim Morrison. I'm here to tell you that was a creature of Oliver Stone fantasy. We never heard about Indians. And I promise you we heard about everything he ever knew, because he made sure we did. After one semester, where the vote was 5-0, we didn't give him a vote. We kicked him out. And he ended up living in a mobile home someplace in Tallahassee. He did finish that year. Then he came back to Clearwater. He went to JC for a short while and then went on to California. I never saw him after we kicked him out. And after I was elected to the county commission in '84, through my year as chairman of the Circuit Judges Conference and legislative session of 2000, I'd go to Tallahassee probably 3 or 4 times a year during the session. And occasionally I'd be taking a shuttle from the hotel back to the airport, and invariably the driver of the shuttle would point out this house that Jim Morrison lived in. And I said, boy, that's great. Well, that wasn't a mobile home, and it wasn't the house we lived in. So whatever he wanted to think and to tell the tourist was fine with me. The last thing I had to do with anything involving Morrison, I guess it was 4 or 5 years ago, I get contacted by a fellow who's doing a documentary about Jim Morrison before the Doors. And he's been to Maryland, he's talked to people where Morrison spent part of his early life. I think he'd been over to Brevard County where Morrison was born. I'm not sure how long he lived there. And he kind of tracked down 3 of the roommates, Chris Calavocas, Brian Gates, and myself. And he had something set up at Iowa Grill to do an interview, if you will, with me. And it was in the wintertime, obviously, because it wasn't that late, but it was dark. And he had the big lights set up. And this was in the upper deck behind Island Way Grill, if you guys know that. And for probably about a couple hours, I'm being asked questions and given answers and so forth and so on. And he promised to get back in touch with me if it ever got it released. Well, last I heard about him, he was in Taos, New Mexico, trying to raise money. And I've heard nothing since, so don't get your hopes up about Jim Morrison before the Doors. The fellow that replaced Jim was, his name was Carl Farmer. He was from Orlando. I was telling Dr. Gary earlier that he had a ukulele, and he had taught himself how to play Malagueña. He could play nothing else. Nothing. But during parties, he'd drag this thing out, play it, the girls would go gaga, and he'd, with all due humility, put it back under the couch, play nothing else. But that was an interesting year. Had more fun the second semester because I went to Mardi Gras and I went to spring break in Daytona and ended up getting every grade in the book. Got real good marks first half, even though Morrison was there and we partied. It was interesting. I actually lost track of him. I didn't know who he was. I was unfamiliar with his music until after he passed. Brian Gates, one of the roommates, went to work for the Internal Revenue out of undergraduate school. And he was in Miami during the obscenity trial, and he related this to me. And he sat in for one day of the trial, and then he and Morrison went out for dinner afterwards. And he said, you know, Val Kilmer looked a lot like Morrison looked at that time. He put on some weight. But he said he was into the drug of choice he was into in undergraduate school, which was tequila. We never saw any hard drugs from him. He just drank and was a jerk. And we got rid of him. And before the Terry Schiavo case, I thought that was going to be my claim to fame. And after Shivo, I'd have been just as happy with that being my claim to fame. But Hamden was a good lawyer in that case. He did more than carry George Figos' books. And Hamden called me not too long ago. He has speaking engagement with the ABA in Key West about Shivo. And he'd asked him, would you be okay if the judge came along? And they said, of course. So he tells me, we got a private plane out of St. Pete, 6 a.m. on a Saturday morning. And I said, Hamden, I'm not getting up on Island Estates to be in downtown St. Pete at 6. You rented the plane, I'll rent the rooms at the Hilton. So we spent the night before at the Hilton, flew down to Key West, had a nice presentation of the ABA. And that's it. And I'm not picking on Alan. I've only charged one person and one entity to speak to, and that was a private law, quasi-private law school, St. Thomas. But I've never charged anybody for anything, especially good friends. The husband of Marcia Gassman.
Wow. Tell us about your scholarship situation program. What you do. Yeah.
One good thing about mediating is that it creates money we can do good things with that we might not otherwise be able to do or willing to do. I was just asking Alan if his mom was alive when you established the foundation, and so she could enjoy that, and she was not. And 25 years after my folks died, they both died in '91, unrelated, my sister and I, along with my wife and her husband, established a scholarship at St. Petersburg College in their memory, the Endowed Memorial Scholarship. Prior to that, Miss Patricia has got a scholarship at Western Carolina University to help women coming back to school, which was a track she took. Her goal was to graduate with a bachelor's degree before she turned 50. And in June, she walked across the stage at Eckerd and got her diploma and turned 50 July 2nd. So I wanted to do a scholarship, and my name's going down in history because of Shivo. She was there every blankety blank step of the way, and nobody has a clue about her. So this scholarship is in her name alone. They understand that they tell the students it's her, just her. The only thing I do is write the checks. Her first recipient, we met at the scholarship luncheon. She's had 3 now. 4th we'll meet in October. First one was a widow with 5 children. We went back in December, watched her get her nursing degree, summa cum laude. Last October, a gal spoke from the school and mentioned a 2-week study abroad and how meaningful it was. And Pat's eyes just got a little bit big because she'd spent 3 weeks in a study abroad program through Eckerd in London. So in December, we endowed a study abroad program at Western Carolina, again for women, primarily for women coming back to school. It's called a non-traditional scholarship. I think they only have 2 up there. This is a program, not a scholarship, so they can buy things like airline tickets and things like that with the money. But that's our scholarship story.
Nice. Thank you very much, George.